I'll never forget the feeling of seeing that bright orange eviction notice slapped across my front door. It was the kind of moment that punches you right in the gut before you even know what's going on. At first, I just stood there blinking, my brain trying to process what I was looking at. My name was on it. The address matched. It looked official government-style formatting, bold red letters screaming final notice to vacate, and a deadline stamped for 3 days from now. For a second, my heart stuttered. I hadn't missed any mortgage payments. No one had contacted me. I knew something was wrong. Still, that feeling of dread lodged itself deep in my chest. I peeled the paper off my door and stepped inside, locking the door behind me. The paper crinkled in my shaking hands as I scanned it again. But the more I looked, the more obvious it became. It was fake. The font was too dramatic. The language was oddly aggressive, like it had been written by someone trying to sound legal, but failing miserably. There were no court stamps, no contact information for any law office, and the county eviction code listed at the bottom didn't even exist. That's when I knew this wasn't just a prank. This was someone trying to scare me. And I had a very good idea who Karen. Her name alone could curdle milk. She was the head of our HOA and treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She had the kind of bob haircut that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager." And she never walked around without her leather clipboard and a sour expression. That made everyone want to avoid eye contact. In the 2 years I'd lived here, Karen had filed more complaints against me than I could count. She'd reported me for having unapproved flower pots. Once, she knocked on my door at 7 a.m. to complain that my Halloween decorations were too gory. They were pumpkins. She was relentless, and I had always done my best to stay out of her way, to keep my head down and avoid confrontation. But this faking an eviction notice wasn't just petty, it was a crime, a serious one. You don't impersonate legal documents and post them on someone's private property without consequences. And what Karen clearly didn't know was that I work from home as a legal assistant. I'd helped draft actual eviction notices. I knew what they looked like, how they were processed, and how they were served. This wasn't just harassment anymore, it was criminal impersonation and abuse. Of HOA authority, I took a deep breath and went to my home office. First thing I did was check my doorbell camera. Karen was old school and probably assumed I didn't have security, but she underestimated me again. I scrolled through the footage from earlier that morning, and sure enough, there she was at exactly 6:43 a.m. She walked up to my porch, looked over her shoulder twice, and taped the fake eviction notice to my door. She lingered just long enough to smooth it out with her hand, like she was proud of it, then turned on her heel and walked away like she hadn't just committed a felony. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen for a long moment. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was targeted, premeditated harassment. Karen had crossed a line that she couldn't walk back from. That evening, I decided to pay her a little visit. I printed out a still image from the camera footage, her standing on my porch, hand pressed against the fake notice, and headed down the street. She was outside watering her garden, like she didn't have a care in the world. I walked right up to her and handed her the printout. "We need to talk," I said, calm but firm. She looked down at the picture, and the color drained from her face. "Oh, that was just a warning," she said, suddenly flustered. "I thought you should know your yard violations were getting serious." "That's not what this is," I said, holding up the actual notice. "This is fake, and you posted it pretending it was from the county. That's a crime, Karen." She tried to recover, muttering something about neighborhood standards and enforcing the rules, but her voice was shaky and her eyes kept darting to the paper in my hand. I told her plainly. I had her on video. I was filing a police report first thing in the morning, and I wasn't just reporting her for harassment, I was pressing charges for impersonating a legal official and filing a fraudulent eviction notice. What I didn't tell her yet was that I had already called my cousin, who works at a local law firm that deals specifically with HOA overreach and abuse. This wasn't the first time they'd heard about a rogue HOA president throwing their weight around, but it was one of the more blatant cases. The firm had handled similar cases, and they knew exactly how to take it down methodically, legally, and publicly. By the time the sun came up the next morning, The police had already come by to take my statement. I gave them the footage, the fake notice, and the timeline of her prior complaints against me. Karen must have sensed the walls closing in because she stopped patrolling the neighborhood and went strangely quiet. But it was already too late. She had finally gone too far, and the consequences were coming faster than she could imagine. The legal wheels started turning quickly. Karen was served with a restraining order that barred her from contacting me in any way. Then came the formal investigation into her conduct as HOA president. It didn't take long for other neighbors to step forward with their own horror stories unauthorized. Fines, threats, manipulated violation notices. Turns out, Karen had been running her little HOA fiefdom like a dictatorship for years, and no one had pushed back until now. As I sat on my porch that weekend, sipping my coffee and enjoying the peaceful silence, I couldn't help but smile, for the first time in a long time. The neighborhood felt calm. Karen's reign of terror was unraveling fast, and she didn't even know yet that the worst part was still to come. Karen had always believed she was untouchable for years. She ran the HOA like it was her personal kingdom, issuing fines, making up rules, and intimidating anyone who dared question her. The worst part was most people just accepted it. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want to be her next target. But once she faked that eviction notice and got caught on camera, the game changed. What she thought would be a quick scare tactics spiraled into a legal storm that she never saw coming. Once the restraining order was in place and the investigation into her HOA misconduct began, things escalated quickly. My cousin's law firm filed a civil suit against her and the HOA board for harassment, abuse of power, and defamation. We had the video evidence, the falsified document, and testimonies from multiple neighbors who had been quietly bullied by Karen for years. People who had never spoken up suddenly found the courage. One woman said Karen fined her $250 for having a bird feeder, claiming it attracted nuisance wildlife. Another neighbor had been written up for leaving his Christmas lights up 3 days past New Year's, and yet another had been accused of unauthorized roofing color when his roof had been the same. Since he moved in 10 years ago, it became clear this wasn't an isolated case. It was a pattern of behavior, and it was ugly. In court, Karen tried to play the victim. She wore a somber black outfit and claimed she was only doing her duty to uphold community standards. She blamed miscommunication and said she never meant to cause distress, but the judge wasn't buying it. When my lawyer played the video of her sneaking up to my door with that fake eviction notice, her expression crumbled. There was no excuse. The judge called her actions grossly inappropriate, unethical, and bordering on criminal. She was found liable for harassment and impersonation of a legal officer. But here's where it got interesting, because she acted as the HOA president when she did it. The HOA itself was partially responsible. The court ruled in my favor on all counts. Karen was ordered to pay a significant sum in damages, not just for emotional distress, but for defamation and legal costs. The HOA was also ordered to compensate a portion of the settlement, since they had failed to provide oversight and had allowed her to operate without accountability. Karen didn't have the money, not even close, and her homeowner's insurance didn't cover fraudulent acts or abuse of office. She tried everything to delay payment, filed appeals, begged for a reduced amount, and even tried to shift blame onto the rest of the board. But none of it worked. The final judgment was clear and non-negotiable. The only way she could satisfy the debt was to liquidate her assets, and that meant selling her home. She listed it quietly, probably hoping no one would notice, but I noticed, and I made a move she never would have expected. I put in a cash offer through a shell company, managed by my cousin's firm. It was a legal move, clean and above board, and given the debt hanging over her, she had no choice but to accept. The day she found out I was the new owner was probably one of the most satisfying moments of my life. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. She answered the door when we served her with the lease paperwork, eyes wide with disbelief as she read the name at the bottom. Mine. The very person she tried to scare out of the neighborhood was now legally her landlord under tenant protection laws. She had the right to stay for 90 days, but that meant signing a rental agreement, paying rent on time, and respecting the property. My property. She tried to protest at first, acting like she could challenge it, but legally, she had no ground left to stand on. She signed the lease. Those 3 months were awkward, to say the least. Karen went from barking orders at the HOA meetings to avoiding eye contact with everyone. Her perfect little garden became overgrown. Her porch, once a stage for judgment, sat dusty and silent. The neighbors, who had once tiptoed around her, began to talk freely. With Karen's grip loosened, people actually started enjoying the neighborhood again. After the 90 days, she packed her things into a moving van without ceremony. No goodbyes, no confrontations, just silence. She left in the early morning hours like she was hoping to disappear unnoticed. And in a way, that's exactly what she did. The HOA board was forced to hold emergency elections. A kind older gentleman, named Mr. Ramsey, who had lived in the community for 30 years, was unanimously elected as the new president. His first order of business? Reducing fines and rewriting the HOA bylaws to limit presidential authority. A transparency committee was formed. Monthly reports were shared publicly. It was a total transformation, all triggered by one woman's downfall. As for me, I made a few upgrades to the house I'd acquired. Nothing flashy, just some landscaping and interior renovations. I didn't want to live there, but I didn't want to sell it either, so I turned it into a rental offering. It had a fair price to a young couple with a baby on the way. When they moved in, I left them a welcome basket and a note that read, "This house used to belong to someone who forgot what it means to be a neighbor. Let's change that." Sometimes I still walk past that house and shake my head. It's wild how quickly things turned. All because Karen thought she could bully people forever without consequence. She forgot one simple truth: when you push the wrong person too far, you might just end up on the wrong side of everything. I sit on my porch now with a kind of peace I haven't felt in years. No more threats taped to my door. No more nonsense about garbage bins or seasonal decorations. The neighborhood is quieter, friendlier, lighter. Justice, it turns out, isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the woman who tried to evict me now pays the price every time someone mentions her name.